All right, we are almost done with fractions. So the next thing that we're going to look at is adding and subtracting unlike fractions. This comes from section 3.3 in your book, and for the signed fractions, it comes from section 9.2. Okay, so let's talk about adding two unlike fractions vertically. Let's say we want to add 1/2 plus 1/3. Now, some of you may say, well, why don't we just add straight across? And that would be wrong. If we added straight across, we would end up with 2/5. 2/5 is less than 1/2, and does that make sense in the context of the problem? Well, if we're adding something onto 1/2, it should be bigger than 1/2, and so this would be wrong. So let's go ahead and talk about this visually. So let's say we have a circle and we want to add 1/2 plus 1/3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the circle and I'm going to shade 1/2. This is the orange region. And 1/3, this is the blue region. So what is this all equal to if I add the orange and the blue? Well, we need to divide this into equal pieces. And so if we go ahead and look at the second circle, this has been divided into equal pieces now. And so what do we have here? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of a total of 6. So notice that what we did is 1/2, I want to write with a denominator of 6. That's equal to 3/6. And 1/3, if we write that with a denominator of 6, that's equal to 2/6. Once our denominators are the same, now we can use our procedure for adding like fractions. We add the tops to get 5, and we keep the bottoms. So that's going to be the trick when we talk about adding unlike fractions. The first step is always to find the least common multiple of the denominators. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. So our procedure for adding and subtracting unlike fractions. The first thing we want to do is determine what we call the LCD. LCD stands for least common denominator, and this is the least common multiple of the denominators. This is what we worked on in the last section. From there, we want to rewrite each fraction equivalently with denominators equal to the LCD. Now remember that we are going to have to multiply the tops and the bottoms by the same numbers for each fraction. Once our denominators are the same, then we can add or subtract the numerators, keep the denominator, and then simplify the fraction if possible. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. Example A. The first thing I want is I want my LCD. Now if you're saying 3, remember that 3 is the greatest common factor. It is not the least common denominator. We have to be able to multiply to the LCD. I cannot multiply 9 by something and get 3. And so we actually want to go the other direction. My LCD for this one is actually 9. So in order to do this, the first thing we're going to do is I want to write each fraction with a denominator of 9. For my first one, to get from 3 to 9, we need to multiply by 3. And remember, whatever we do to the bottom, we do to the top. So this becomes 6/9. My second fraction, we can go ahead and leave that the same. And now that my denominators are the same, we can go ahead and add the tops. 6 plus 1 is 7. keep the bottom. Does this simplify? And the answer is no. So we are done. All right, let's come over to example B. Example B, I want to know what is my LCD. And so what is a number that is divisible by 8 and 3? If you recall, I said in the last section that this is our second easy case. 8 and 3 have no common factors, and so we can find the LCD just by multiplying the two numbers together. It is going to be 24. So how do we get from 8 to 24? We're going to multiply by 3. We get 15 over 24. How do we get from 3 to 24? We multiply by 8. Whatever we do to the bottom, we do to the top, so we get 8 over 24. Now that my denominators are the same, we can go ahead and add. We get 15 plus 8 is 23. Keep the bottom. We get 23 over 24. This does not simplify, and so we are done. All right, let's look at example C. Now, one thing I want to point out in this section is that if you're stuck on what the least common denominator is, we don't have to worry so much about least common denominator. You can always use just a common denominator. And a common denominator is always multiply the two bottom numbers together. We get 150. And so now how do we go ahead and get from 15 to 150? We want to multiply by 10. We get 60 over 150. How do we get from 10 to 150? We multiply by 15. If we multiply top and bottom by 15, we get 45 over 150. Now if we go ahead and add, we get 105 over 150. From here I need to go ahead and simplify. So what can I divide by? Well, the first thing that I notice is 5. If I divide by 5, I get 21 over 30. This is not simplified, so we can go ahead and simplify further. We can divide by 3. And we get 7 over 10. One thing to note is if you have just a common denominator, you will have to simplify. Whereas if you use the least common denominator, then you just might have to simplify. So let's go ahead and do this problem again just to show you that it doesn't matter. And I want to go with the least common denominator. The smallest number that is divisible by 15 and 10 is 30. So if we go ahead and work with our first fraction, to get from 15 to 30, I want to multiply by 2. We do it to the top and bottom, we get 12 over 30. Second fraction, I want to multiply by 3. We get 9 over 30. And if we add these, we get 21 over 30. Again, I can divide both by 3. And we get 7 over 10. Okay, there's some examples of addition. Let's go ahead and look at a couple more examples. Next ones that I want to look at involve subtraction. So starting with example D, my LCD for this one, you may not know what is the LCD, and so let's go ahead and multiply the two numbers together. 7 times 12, this is 84. And this is in fact our LCD. 7 and 12 have no common factors, and so this is the best that we can do. So the first fraction I want to multiply by 12 to the top and the bottom. We get 36 over 84. To get from 12 to 84, I want to multiply by 7. We get 35 over 84. And now if we subtract the tops, we get 1. Keep the bottom, we end up with 1 over 84. All right, a couple more. Let's look at example E. What is my LCD? I want a number that is divisible by 4 and 12, or something that is a multiple of 4 and 12. And for this one, our LCD is actually going to be the 12. Remember that we have to multiply to it. So the first fraction I want to multiply by 3 to the top and the bottom. We get 9 over 12. Second fraction we'll leave the same. And if we subtract, we get 2 over 12. I need to simplify this, so I'm going to divide by 2. And we end up with 1 over 6. All right, one more subtraction problem. Let's look at example F. 6 and 9 have some common factors. So what do you think the LCD is for 6 and 9? Well, the smallest number that is a multiple of 6 and 9 is 18. If you're not sure, remember you can always multiply the two numbers together to get 54. But let's go ahead and work with 18. So now let's go ahead and see what we got. How do we get from 6 to 18? We want to multiply by 3. Do the same thing to the top. We get 15 over 18. To get from 9 to 18, we want to multiply by 2. We'll do the same thing to the top. And we get 14 over 18. If we go ahead and subtract, 15 minus 14 is 1. Keep the bottom, we get 1 over 18. All right, so that's some basic adding and subtracting. So now let's bring in our sign numbers. If we look at example G, same thing again, we're just going to go ahead and combine the fractions. So I still need LCD. The smallest number divisible by 2 and 3, or as a multiple of 2 and 3, is 6. So I'm going to multiply the first fraction by 2. Make sure that you keep the negative, don't drop it. We get negative 4 over 6. Second fraction, we're going to multiply by 3. And we get 3 over 6. Okay, now we need to bring in our rules of signs. Do we have same signs or different signs? For this one we have different signs, so I want to subtract. We get negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. We're going to subtract and keep the sign of the larger number, and we keep the denominator. So we get negative 1 over 6. All right, let's look at example H. First thing I want to do, and again, it doesn't matter what order you do this in, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of my minus and negative. So I'm going to do negative 5, 6 plus 1/4. All right, what is my LCD? The smallest number that is divisible by 6 and 4 is 12. If you want to do 24, 24 would be fine as well. It's just not the least. So the first fraction, let's go ahead and multiply by 2. Remember to keep your negative. So we get negative 10 over 12 plus second fraction. To get from 4 to 12, we multiply by 3. So we get 3 over 12. Now we bring in our same signs, different signs. These have different signs. This is a negative 10 and a positive 3. So we're going to subtract. Keep the sign of the larger number. We get negative 7. And keep the denominator. We get negative 7 over 12. All right, last one, I. Want my LCD. The smallest number that is divisible by 8 and 4 is 8. Remember, we have to multiply to it. So my first fraction stays the same. This is negative 5 over 8 minus second fraction. To get from 4 to 8, we multiply by 2. So I'm going to do that to top and bottom. We get 6 over 8. And now do we have same signs or different signs? We have a negative 5/8, and remember we want to treat this as a negative 6/8. So we do have same signs, which means I want to add, keep my sign, and keep my denominator. We can write this as a mixed number. This is an improper fraction. So I want to know how many times does 8 go into 11. That's going to be 1. We get a remainder of 3. So 11 over 8 is equal to 1 and 3/8. And now we're just going to bring down our negative sign. We get negative 1 and 3/8. All right, that takes care of adding and subtracting fractions. I believe we have 2 more sections. The next section we're going to look at is mixed numbers, adding and subtracting mixed numbers. So go ahead, take a quick break, and I will see you again shortly.